Agustina Vergara Cid, was on the program a couple months ago, and I heard from several of you that you really enjoyed the conversation. And I wanted to have her back, and she pitched an article about dehumanization that I thought was perfectly set in this moment. Dehumanization is a concept that I've been thinking a lot about, and I talk about this in my interview with her, but I want to highlight it here right at the beginning, because this is when you're all listening. Dehumanization is the direct opposite of the American ideal. It is the direct opposite of the Judeo-Christian heritage. The dehumanization is the exact opposite of Western values. Dehumanization says that one group of people is superior to another group of people. And the opposite view is that every human being is created in the image of God with dignity, liberty, and deserving of respect. And the concepts of dignity and liberty are core to what I believe, what American values are set on. And so to go through this period where we are dehumanizing immigrants, I think has been very disappointing to me. It's disappointing to our guest, because I think it's just a betrayal of what we as Americans believe, which is every individual comes here, with the ability to be free to create their own destiny, as long as it's lawful and voluntarily cooperative with other people. And so we talk a lot. We talk later about the issues, but I think what Augustina articulates in the first half of this episode is why she came to America, what she views as American values, and it's why she was in Argentina and yet considered herself an American. And I think it's a beautiful tribute to this country. And then we get into some of the immigration issues that are happening with the Trump administration kind of later. But really, this is a conversation about deeper values and what is an American and what does America care about and how do we treat our fellow people. So I think it's a really interesting conversation, and I hope you'll enjoy this. So here is my conversation with Agustina Vergara Cid. Agustina, thanks so much for joining me again.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
I had 3 people write in and say, have her back, which is a great sign that people really enjoyed our conversation, and you're very thoughtful, and this is obviously a hot topic. So I really appreciate you coming back.
Thank you so much, and thanks for those who wrote in. I just really enjoyed our conversation last time.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, your background. Obviously, tell us a little bit about your story, and then, I can guess why immigration policies are important to you as an immigrant, as you've mentioned. But also, how did you get involved in writing about these topics? Why are you passionate about these things? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm an immigrant to the United States. I came here a few years ago. I was fortunate to be able to do it legally, but the process was hard and convoluted and really put in perspective how difficult it is for people. Like, I love America, and I am, someone that wanted to come here to build a life and have a family. And it was incredibly hard to do it. And then I found that most people, peaceful people, productive people that want to come to America aren't able to do it. And in fact, many of the regulations that the system put forward are really commit a lot of injustices to these people. So I just became interested in the issue of immigration, and then I found it really fascinating because immigration is such a broad topic that involves all sorts of things, from economics to issues around assimilation to individual stories, right? Because each immigrant has a different stories. We are used to hearing about the H-1B visa and the illegal immigrants and these, regulation and this other regulation and these weird, letters and numbers. But behind all that, there's human beings, and it's immigration policy is distinctive, like from energy policy in the sense that there's every single visa, every single border crossing or whatever asylum application is a human being with a story, right? And I feel like there's a lot of there's a lot of losing sight of the fact that these are people, these are individuals. So I kind of like wanted to highlight a little bit more, the individuality in this otherwise collectivistic debate.
Yeah. So, what is it that you love about America? Why did you want to come to America? What are the values and principles that you feel like these connect with me on a deeper level?
So how much time do you have, though? Yeah, no. So look, I actually have an article about this. Two articles where I discuss the some of the reasons that I love America. We can maybe add them to the show notes or something.
You have to.
But I'll just highlight a couple things. So um, from a young age, I realized that there was a difference. I'm from Argentina originally, so while Argentina is not and was not, especially back then, a place like it's not Venezuela. It's not like a full-on dictatorship where people are starving. It was super, super close in recent times to being that, but it wasn't a few years ago, although there was very collectivistic and whatnot. But I realized that there was this difference between when I visited the States back then. There was this big difference between the way that people conducted themselves in America and the abundance in America, like going to the supermarket and seeing the size of the supermarket and the abundance of products and everything, comparing it back home to what I thought was normal or whatever. Like the way that people even conduct themselves and speak and speak about their own lives is just so radically different. And I could not put my finger on what the difference was and why does America have Disneyland and Disney World and we don't? Like why is that? Um and then growing up, when I started learning more about ideas and philosophy, I found Ayn Rand's answer to this to be very compelling, which is, look, America is, uniquely moral in its founding principles. Its rejection of collectivism and its praise and its upholding of the individual and individual rights and separating the individual from this collective and rejecting authoritarianism in the way that American founding fathers did. um, that's part of the reason why Americans, like the very founding of this country, was inspired by individualism and by productivity, by striving for more and striving for freedom. It's the first country that did this. And I think that greatly impacted the way that it was fundamental to America's development in freedom to what it has become. Of course, America, like even during the founding time, like had really shameful, has a really shameful history in many respects. But that is to the extent that America has rejected the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the founding principles. And I think, throughout history, America has deviated more and more and more from those founding principles. But I think, part of what I want to do is, get back to that defense of, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, which has such a deep, deep and important meaning and has allowed this country to become the good things that it has become.
Yeah, this is one of the beautiful things about America is that the Martin Luther King quote, "The long arc of history bends towards justice, and it also bends towards liberty." And I think in so many different areas of American society, you have seen more liberty, more justice expand over time. But hypocrisy is one of those things in American history that is just part of our fabric, right? You have a slaveholder writing the words of the Declaration of Independence from the very founding. And we are a nation of immigrants. I have no idea when my family immigrated here. I haven't done the genealogy to go back and see, but I know that at some point a German, a Norwegian, and a British person immigrated to America. But within American history, there are these dark strains of anti-immigrant thought and rhetoric, and that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about today, because I'd love to get your perspective on that. Because I think we're seeing it right now, and I think people if they're not particularly into history, they think that their own time is unique and special. but we've had these periods like the Boston Brahmins and the gold, this book called The Golden Door that my friend read that was really, about the 1920s. In Indiana, for instance, we had the 1920s Klan, a third of the state, or I think it was 2/3 of the state was in the Klan, and very deeply anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-immigrant. We've gone through these different periods where we are immigrants, but then we seem to turn on immigrants at certain points. Where should we begin in this conversation? Because I want to pick your brain on why you think that is.
So yeah, I agree. Like when bad things happen, one thinks, oh, this is uniquely bad in history. This is unprecedented. And even sometimes, this happens a lot with the Trump administration, where like the media will say, oh, this thing that Trump is doing is unprecedented. Completely, no one has ever done anything this bad before.
And then you look up Andrew Jackson.
Right. Yeah. So and then you look at history, and like if you look into it, some of things that the Trump administration has done, and Biden and Obama, whatever, can be unprecedented. But a lot of the things really, are not uniquely bad and like have happened in the past. And part of this is, I think, so what I hear a lot, because I read a lot about immigration and I discuss this topic with a lot of people that are generally pro-immigration, or that are, have a healthy view of, people should more or less be allowed to come here if they're peaceful and productive. They find some of the rhetoric around immigration like really harsh, like, and really hateful. And they're like, okay, this is, this type of rhetoric I'm not comfortable with, like saying, immigrants are eating the dogs and the cats, and they are rapists, and the chain migration, they just bring their aunts and uncles who are criminals and rapists, and this is an invasion. They think that this rhetoric is dehumanizing, and they're right, but they think it's unique or new, and in fact it is really not. Like, honestly, this fear and sometimes hatred of outsiders is not new. It's been going on since before this country was actually America. So there's always been some sort of kind of like this tribalism, and like, trying to exclude the outsider and being scared of people that are different and whatnot. And part of it is, this hateful rhetoric around immigrants is really not new. And in fact, if you kind of like look into how old some of the accusations against immigrants and some of the myths around immigration, how old are they? Like, they take our jobs, they, depress wages, they come here to change the culture, they are all criminals, they're disproportionately, violent, whatever. They bring disease, which is one that keeps getting recycled. These arguments were being made against these not arguments, these accusations have been made since like the early 1800s at least. And they just keep repeating over and over again, including the claim of, I don't know if you've heard, but it's like, oh, the immigrants today are not the same as the immigrants before. Yeah. Like my grandparents, that generation was good, but now they're different. That has been going on since the 1800s. So really? What is the cutoff, right? So yeah, this has been going on for such a long time.
Specifically, that was said by a recent guest who he's a nice guy, but I did not get good feedback from the audience on that one. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about immigration, and he said almost exactly that. The immigration is different now. And one thing I find interesting that I love your perspective on, that I have noticed in the right, is an adoption of right-wing talking points from Europe around immigration and then transposing that on American immigration, which I think in so many different ways is different. And you see a lot of the Somalis moving into West Berlin and taking over this quarter, and Brigham, or I think it's Brighton, England, has a Muslim mayor who doesn't really speak English, and that's coming for you here in America, right? That fear-mongering around immigrants has a very European flavor in the Trump era. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so the fear-mongering and this sort of thing, yeah, it's been going on for a while, and it goes on in Europe too. And uh, I think so. I don't think the problems in Europe will ever happen in America, in part because of actually what we were discussing earlier. America is more an idea, right? Like America is this set of principles. That's why American ideals and so I don't know to what extent like you Native born Americans know about this, but there are people who are born in any little tiny country in Latin America, in Europe, Asia, that grow up with American culture, like watching TV, listening to music. And a lot of people, myself included, like feel it's like I was born in the wrong part of the world.
Hmm.
Because I really do agree with how this other society that I see through TV, movies, maybe I chat with someone in America or whatever, uh, I agree way more with how that society conducts itself than with how my own society conducts itself. It's like this idea that really exceeds um, where like a geographical era, right? Like there are so many Americans, I think, in spirit that have never set foot in America, but the idea of America and its values really go well beyond its borders. So the fact that America has such strong values and knows what it stands for, we stand for freedom, we stand for individual rights, is something that, and that's how this country began, right? Like we were just discussing. Europe does not have that. Europe does not stand philosophically for basically anything. There is like this view, this multicultural, like, every culture is equal. Who are we to judge? That sort of thing. Whereas America is like, no, look, freedom is my biggest value. I want and I will respect that from you, and I want you to respect that from me. If you step out of line about that, you will be prosecuted. You will hear from, you will be punished if you try to violate someone else's individual rights. And we don't care if you're Muslim or were born in Ohio. That is true of everyone. And Europe, look, because they're so scared of coming off as racist, and there's like this whole history, with Nazi Germany and whatnot. Part of what is going on is they're scared of calling a spade a spade. And they're like, look, yeah, there's a culture that promotes this sort of view. What needs to happen is to make it clear that these sort of rights violations are not welcome in these countries. But because they don't stand for anything, they don't have a clear view of what actually is true and right and good for human life, then that is part of why they're in the mess they're in. I don't think that can happen in America.
What I hear you saying, look, when I don't know if there are rape gangs of Britain. I can't tell, like, what is a right-wing story, what is being ignored by the press. It's just, I imagine that is, there's obviously some of these things that are right, but when Britons say these people are not being prosecuted, but then I will go to jail for a tweet about it, that's unjust. It's you're not upholding the standards, you're not upholding the laws. As a South American, I hear you saying rule of law is incredibly important. We have these, would you distill it down to the rule of law and obviously moving in a free direction, but just making sure that everybody is equal under the law. Is that what I'm hearing?
That I think that's part of it. But it's more, I think, also like that begins like knowing that there's like a rule of law and like that the law should be respected. But like what laws, right? They should be just objective laws. And one of the ways to tell if this is a just objective law is it proper for the government to take action on this? Is this pro-freedom individual rights or anti-freedom and individual rights? Restrictions on speech. I don't know a lot about what's going on in the UK with free speech, but from what I understand, it's really draconian, the crackdown. So it's not a matter of, the Muslims don't get prosecuted for this and the native-born British do. It's like, okay, is that law actually proper, right? And I think it's more of it starts with the philosophy, right? What is the role of government? What is like, are we trying to allow people to be free and pursue their happiness, like the fact that we have that in the declaration is so crucial? Or what is government trying to do here? Like the Europeans, I don't think have a philosophical foundation for their own values and their own political system. And
Right.
partly because they lack that, they don't have a standard. So I think that's part of what's going on. I don't think these issues will come to America. I think America's philosophical ideas and values are still very strong. They're eroding for sure, but they're still very strong. That I don't think it will happen.
I love the idea of you reflecting back to us a little bit about how you view America and those values. And I love that concept of there's Americans around the world that have never stepped foot on our soil. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. As an American, you ask, how do Americans think about it? I find there to be a lot of cynicism that I do feel bad, because I was talking to actually here in the studio, I was renting at the studio to a young man. He was Ecuadorian, maybe. He was from, I think, Central America, and he was here in America on asylum because he was an activist in his country. He was a Bernie fan. He was more of the socialist bent. He's very active in politics. I think it was in Nicaragua, and he was basically being hunted by the government. And so America gave him asylum, and he's here, and he was just so excited to be here. He'd been here for like 6 months, and he was saying, this is the land of the free, and there's this and that, and he was just asking me, why does it seem like Americans don't appreciate living in America?
Yep.
And I think the more I talked, the less he felt good about it, because being a libertarian is just like, well, they're taking away our rights and they're doing that, right? And I think my view, I realized in that conversation, I demoralized him a little bit, because my view of America is so negative in so many ways, and it didn't jive with how he saw America and why he was so excited to be here. This may be a little more therapeutic question, but help me diagnose that conversation, because I have thought about that every week since we had that conversation, and as a way for me to remember how fortunate I am to be here. But living in America, I feel like we are so cynical about our government, our culture, where we're headed. It just feels like a very negative time, and we need Reagan to come back. You to run for president and make us feel good about our country again, in articulating these values, because we've forgotten it, I think.
So I think there's several layers to this, but this is an issue I've thought about a lot, because part of what I've seen since I've come here is, so I'll give you a concrete example. I was hanging out a few years ago with some family members in America from a, say, leftist proclivity, and they were this. It was during Trump won,
Okay,
and they were saying how this country is a dumpster fire, right? It's horrific. But this is not new, they said. Like, what can you expect from a country that was founded in the back of slaves, and like that sort of, rhetoric that is really, I don't agree at all with that. But then in the same breath, they turn around to me and say, but we're so glad you're here. Right? So
thanks for joining the dumpster fire.
Right. It's like, okay, so which one? And people generally that have this view tend to be, for immigrant rights and whatnot. Look, it's one or the other. Either you're happy I'm here because this is better than what I left, or at least minimally good, or this is a dumpster fire. You can't have it both ways, right? I think that one thing that is unique to immigrants is the perspective, especially those who have left regimes that are really authoritarian or that are leaning or going in that direction, is that perspective of having lived elsewhere and then coming here and seeing and enjoying much more freedom, not having to look over their shoulders because someone might come stab them, Or going to the supermarket, like I mentioned, and seeing the abundance. They have so many options because it's a country that generally supports production and people pursuing their values and trade and all of that. So I think that Americans are right to be outraged when things are bad, because yes, of course you should fight for what's right in your country and complain and whatnot. But also don't lose sight of the fact that your society is already really, really moral and good. Fight like so it's more of like, let's try to preserve the best aspects of this society versus, oh, everything's bad and it's getting worse. It's gonna be like more value oriented. And I think that part of it is like an understanding this unique American experiment, as it's sometimes called, and just understanding there's a reason why so many people want to come here.
Yeah.
They don't like people want to come here because America is uniquely good, free, uniquely moral. There's so many opportunities, so many good things that even people that are living semi-free countries like the UK want to live here, and probably would many of them live here instead of a semi-free country like the UK or Canada, because this is better, right? So yeah, I think sometimes some Americans lose perspective of just how good America is, but that's even more reason to keep, pushing for it to really live up fully to the values of the Declaration.
Were you surprised by that cynicism, or do you not see as much cynicism as maybe I do?
No, I do see that kind of like this, and it really irritates me because, especially, I see it from the left, and then on the right, I also see some very kind of like fake or like cheap patriotism. Not everyone, but I've seen it. But so to me, it's insulting because, and especially when people talk that way about America in front of me, because like, think about it this way. So I was mentioning my immigration journey was difficult. And I gave up a lot to be here. I really did give up a lot. We can have a different podcast to discuss it, but it was painful. It was expensive. It was time consuming. It was extremely, honestly, traumatic at one point. And there's people talking in front of me saying that I gave up so much to be in this dumpster fire. Like, and I find that actually offensive. You know what I mean? Like, because I made the decision, and I don't see it as a sacri. I mean, it's like a really complex story, but I invested all of these resources, and I went through so much to seek the positive, the immense positive that America is for my life as an individual who wants to live in peace, who wants to produce, right? So people talking in front of me saying outright lies about American history or what this country means, I find it offensive. And I think it's offensive. I don't claim to speak in the name of all immigrants, but nobody leaves their home because they want to. They would wish they could stay, but if there's something better across the border, they may search for it. So and it's really hard to do. And like telling people, oh, you just did all of that for this, this dumpster fire, this horrible place that is irredeemable. That is so insulting, honestly.
So let's go back to dehumanization, because this is something that I think a lot about, because it is, there's a book called Making Monsters that I just started, and then I have to give it back to the library, and even though I'm not through the introduction yet, but I have to look up this guy's name because he's written a couple books on dehumanization. It really seems to me to be like at the heart of so much. David Livingston Smith. He's written a lot about dehumanization. I think, to me, that is, I think it's a choice that each of us make. Are you going to engage in rhetoric or conversations that dehumanize other people? And to me, it's you talk about the American creed. It's the opposite of the American creed. Like, I don't know if you're a religious person. I am. So much of the American creed is built around the Imago Dei, that every person is built in the image of God, created in the image of God, and therefore deserving of liberty, dignity, respect. And when I say that, it is so interesting how many libertarians sometimes will. Well, I don't think people deserve respect. It's like I think that's kind of the basis of Western values, right? You claim that you want to protect the West, but then you don't want to protect the Imago Dei, which is at the core of the revolution in Roman society that Christians brought to the Roman Republic. So I think when we choose to engage in dehumanizing rhetoric about anybody, I think political bigotry is the most accepted form of bigotry. You can get away with hating the left if you're a Republican, and nobody will check you. You can silo yourself. If you're on the left, you can hate the Republicans and talk all this trash and silo yourself. And that political bigotry, it's like you find out somebody's a different party than you, and you just, no, they're out, right? I think people have done it with immigrants. I'd love your perspective on that and just dehumanization and how you define it and how you think about it.
Yeah, I think this is just a phenomenon of tribalism, which is, I belong to this group and it's my group, right or wrong, and I'm just going to follow what my group says. And if I am for my group, then the other group is bad. And I'm just going to hate that group. I'm not going to think for myself. I'm going to let the leaders of my group tell me what to do. It's like this sort of tribal wars that occur, which are like exactly anti-individualism and anti the values that we were just discussing that America was founded on, right? So, when it comes to immigrants, the dehumanization, I think, is just the repeated way of referring to immigrants as this collective that is inherently bad for some reason, for some magic reason, I suppose. They are an invasion. They are criminals. They eat the cats and the dogs. And there's no truth to that. There's just trying to fearmonger and paint them as the enemy, right? Or
yeah, I on that, I actually had lunch with an AP reporter who is Haitian, who his first assignment was in Springfield during all of that. So he had unprecedented access or unparalleled access to any of his peers as reporters to the Haitian community. And they suffered like you would not believe. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand why this was happening to them because they felt about America. And this is what he was telling me, that they came here to work. They came here because they love the country. And then it turned on them. And now many of them are being deported. And it was very confusing. And isn't it amazing that now that he's president, the dogs and the cats, nobody's talking about them, and we're not talking about Springfield. It was just this moral panic in that moment of time that was useful to a demagogue, and that community suffered because of it.
Yeah, that's part of it, because when you dehumanize and you make it seem like the other, in this case the Haitians, for instance, are something less than humans or are barbaric or whatever, once you make people believe that, then you can honestly do whatever you want to them. Like, who cares? They eat the dogs and the cats or whatever other claim, right? So, and I will disagree though. I don't think, I mean, yeah, it was convenient at the moment and some people just ate it up, even though it was debunked many, many times. But now the Trump administration has tried to end the parole programs that were welcoming of Haitians, right? But now part of it is like, oh, but like so many people are now skeptical of them. So yeah, let's get them out just in case. Like, what if that's true? So I think a lot of this rhetoric ends up justifying policies, very real policies that end up having horrible consequences on the immigrants and the native-born Americans alike. So for instance, in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in Congress, which is this legislation that basically excluded almost everyone of Chinese nationality from immigrating to the United States. And part of it is that the Chinese have started arriving around 1850, mostly for the California Gold Rush, but they started working here and arriving in large numbers, and then a lot of people were hating them because they were different, and they worked more than many of the Americans because they wanted to make money quick. They were just brand new. They spoke a different language. They looked totally different. They ate different food sometimes even. And there was this rhetoric that was bad. And they were like demonizing, like they're filthy. All the women are prostitutes, like literal things that were said about the Chinese. They are diseased. They are just immoral inherently because they are Chinese. That rhetoric ultimately kind of like made it acceptable to exclude a whole group of people, which later on expanded to the whole Asian continent, to exclude them from immigrating to the United States. The same is true for other immigrants that were demonized and said like, oh, like the Irish were drunk and constantly and diseased.
Which still
And
persists 150 years later, right? Like these stereotypes still those ghosts are still there.
yeah, and at one point in history, right, like they led to actual legislation in 1924. uh, uh, Sweeping immigration reform was passed that excluded most countries like from Eastern and Southern Europe from immigrating to the United States and the whole Asian continent because of this sort of rhetoric. They thought, okay, these people are inherently inferior and they are contaminating Americans' white race, as if Americans were an ethnicity, which is the most un-American idea possible, that Americans are an ethnicity. And it led to many decades of horrible immigration restrictions, and it led to all sorts of rejection of immigrants. That, like, for instance, during the World War II, there was a ship coming from Nazi Germany with Jewish refugees, the MS St. Louis. This, because there was also, because historically has been true, this dehumanization of the Jewish people, because there was so much of that going on and this whole rhetoric about the Eastern Europeans and whatnot, that ship with hundreds of people was turned around, was rejected. Like, say, like, no, you cannot land here. You have to go back. We're not accepting anyone in America. Most of those people ended up going to back to Germany and being killed in concentration camps. So this is all a consequence of partly all of a consequence of accepting that the other tribe, the other people that is not, quote, us, they are not human. They're something less than human, and so it's okay to do whatever to them. We don't treat them as human beings, as individuals. We treat them as this evil collective that is somehow damaging us or hurting us or want to hurt us or whatever. And honestly, we're seeing a lot of that today when people don't really care what is happening to the Venezuelans and others sent to El Salvador without any sort of due process. Who cares, right? I heard like there's this gay barber from Venezuela that was apparently wrongly accused of being a gang member. And I heard people say, who cares? It's just a gay barber from Venezuela.
It literally, was it Greg Gutfeld said that on Fox News? From a
Right.
position of authority and power, when you are in the media, you have a position of authority and power, or you have Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is the current conversation, right? The man who is, I've posted about him, and one group of libertarians say he's a terrorist, and one group of say he's a freedom fighter, family man, right? Like he's been labeled a terrorist because there's a photo of him wearing a Bulls hat, and that is apparently an MS-13 gang sign, according to Jesse Waters at Fox News, and that's what qualifies. Okay, show me the evidence. The courts keep asking for evidence, and the evidence that you often get in a Twitter conversation or a Facebook conversation with somebody that calls him a terrorist is a charge document by the United States government. Right. So they're accusing him of these things. And there's an informant, I guess, that has said he's a gang member in upstate New York, but he's never been to upstate New York. Right. Or there's a different case where one of these guys got deported to the El Salvadoran prisons and he had an autism tattoo, like the ribbon, the autism ribbon. And that was the justification to send him without due process or return back to a country he didn't originate from. and now we have the president this week that we're recording it. It's going to air a couple weeks after recording this, saying the homegrowns are next, right? It's not just people who are here illegally. This is the thing that you always hear, right? Well, they're here illegally. But oftentimes these cases, when you really dig down to it, they are here legally. They're here on asylum claims. They're here on visas. They're here on green cards in the case of the Palestinian protester who's been disappeared, right? Then naturalized citizenship was on the table in the first administration. It's now we've ratcheted this conversation up to American citizens are going to be deported to a Guantanamo Bay, essentially. Like, I don't know. It's so humiliating as an American that we would give up on due process, the rule of law, for what? It's literally what you're talking about. It's just that this group of people has been so dehumanized, but in the public, that the public is allowing the powerful to treat people who have no resources in a dehumanized way. And that, to me, is the exact opposite of the American ideas that we've talked about.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then it's absolutely true. This is a slippery slope, and that meaning the first part is already slippery, like, which is like it's gonna trickle down to, it's gonna come to U.S. citizens at some point, because when you manage to convince people that, or to get the courts to say, which I don't think this is going to be the case, but to say that 15 million people, which is allegedly the illegal population in the United States, and again, like you said, a lot of these immigrants are not here illegally. When you get to say that 15 million people don't have the same rights, they don't have due process rights, and don't have constitutional rights, and don't deserve their day in court, there's really no reason to think that is going to stop there. What other group is going to be, demonized later? Maybe it's like, okay, we're just going to send the super violent criminals to El Salvador, even if they're American born. Like, we're just, but it's these unpopular targets that then it's like they're going to keep moving the goalposts. Like, okay, we'll start with illegal immigrants because we have been telling people that they're so evil and they're gang
It's literally
members.
what Rodrigo Duerte, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like what you're saying is literally what Duerte did in the Philippines. He ran on executing like extrajudicial killings of drug dealers. And then when he got into office, he started killing drug dealers. And now he is up for war crimes, or in The Hague, for not for war crimes, but for crimes against humanity, because the population got so into killing drug dealers that, lo and behold, the neighbor they have a dispute with was a drug dealer, and so they killed them, and and they would turn them into the government. And it led, and to hear Trump talking about executing drug dealers and going to launch preemptive strikes on Mexico to fight. It feels very 2004 Iraq right now, with so much of this, with Abu Ghraib and people making excuses for that and making excuses for Gitmo, and then America like punches out of the fog in 2008 and looks around and goes, "Wait, what did we do?" Right? It's I don't know. When did you come to America? When did you? How long have you been here?
So I came here on a student visa in 2017.
Okay. I wish I could explain to you how different America is before 2015. Like, I don't know. It was sort of pockets, but now it's different. It's concerning. I don't know. So now where to take the interview? I got all fired up. I'm sorry. I tried not to monologue, but I'm watching this going, where does this stop? Like, I think, to me, the fundamental question of all of this is first, political power. It's not who should have the power, right or left. It's should the power exist, and libertarians have to be grounded in who is using power to what ends for what reasons, and what are the justifications for using that power. And then secondly, I'd love your opinion on just like, is due process a human right? Right? Because I see people argue whatever happens to Mr. Garcia doesn't really matter because he's an immigrant. Like, this is the case that Stephen Miller made yesterday. It's like, who cares? He's an illegal immigrant. And so like that just, okay, well, you're an illegal immigrant, so therefore it's perfectly fine if we send you without due process to get gang raped. Like,
Yeah.
that to me doesn't make any sense. So like, are these values that we're talking about fundamental human rights, or did they only exist for American citizens?
No, they are fundamental human rights. I challenge anyone to find me in the Constitution where it says that basic rights like due process are only for American citizens. There are rights that are only for American citizens, like voting, right? Running for office. But that's not the case with freedom of speech, for instance, or due process. And in response to what you said about Miller, well, due process is one of those rights that if you don't have due process rights, nothing else really matters. Because imagine that, what does due process mean? It means that you get the chance, for instance, to defend yourself against an accusation made by the government against you. And you go in front of a impartial third party, the judge, and you present your evidence. The government presents their evidence, and those are the rules of engagement, and the judge determines who is right and who's wrong. Essentially, I'm oversimplifying clearly. Imagine that you are walking on the street and ICE stops their car and approaches you, and they detain you under the Alien Enemies Act, which is the legislation that was used to detain a lot of the people that were sent to El Salvador, which doesn't allow any sort of due process. And you're like, hey, but wait a minute, I am a U.S. citizen. And they tell you, well, prove it. And you're like, I don't have. What do you mean? Like, I am a U.S. citizen. I don't have my passport on me.
Is that what you're saying?
Doesn't matter. You don't get to go in front of a judge or in front of anybody to show them your American passport, if you have a passport, or your birth certificate, if you even know where it is, because many Americans don't know where their birth certificate is. So, and you are then shipped to El Salvador because you didn't get to actually prove that you're an American citizen, because that is due process and you have none. And then you're sent to this maximum security, essentially torture chamber of a place. And then the US government says, like, oopsie, we made a mistake, but we can't get him back. That is literally what is at stake here. And it's not far-fetched. There have been already US citizens that have been detained. There was this man in Chicago, I don't remember his name, but the listener can look him up. A man in Chicago was detained by ICE overnight for over 10 hours because they thought he was an immigrant, but he was a U.S. citizen, not even naturalized. He was a native-born American. But he did not, and this was not even the Alien Enemies Act, right? They did not listen to him when he said, like, look, I'm an American citizen. What are you guys doing? Someone 10 hours later decided to look in his wallet and found his social security card, which he happened to have in his wallet, and they let him go. But this is already happening to Americans. When there's no due process, there is no guarantee that any of the things that are happening to immigrants are not going to happen to native-born Americans.
Yeah, 90%, according to Bloomberg, 90% of deported migrants to El Salvador had no criminal record. There was an immigration attorney. What was her name? Let me pull this up hopefully it doesn't play a bunch of noise. She's an immigration attorney in Massachusetts. And this doesn't clearly say what her name is, but she's this was NBC 10 Boston did a report where she was sent a letter saying that she was being deported. She's an American citizen, but she was being deported. It's basically they're sending out a bunch of letters to a lot of people saying you're about to be sent to El Salvador in order to get people to self-deport, but they sent it to this Massachusetts lawyer from, as an intimidation tactic, I would guess. And so that's how broad this is at this point. And when the president says, I'm going to deport American citizens, why would we not believe him? Why does everything have to be conspiracy theory and always joking until he actually does it? Like, he wants to
Yeah.
run for third term. He
So
convinced.
about that story that you mentioned, yeah. So what happened was that um, I'm not trying to justify the administration here or the immigration enforcement, and I do think there's an element of who cares. But
Sure.
what's happening is um, there's a lot of people whose parole, which means their authorization to be in the United States, while they're adjusting their visa status or waiting for to hear the resolution of their asylum cases and things like that, a lot of those are being terminated. So they sent an email saying you have 7 days to leave the United States, or else you risk essentially being detained and forcibly deported. So essentially, they'll self-deport now before it gets worse. Part of what happened is they are using apparently, I don't know a lot of details about this, but they're using a new technology which is just went through a database which included immigration attorneys, because sometimes immigration attorneys give their email as part of the representing their clients, and they're just sending these mass emails to people who shouldn't have received that email because they're not paroled here, like including legal immigrants who I've seen stories of legal immigrants receiving this, who have a green card or who are not in another type of visa, not paroled in the United States, and it freaked them out. Imagine receiving an email saying you have 7 days to leave the United States. And if you're literally not an immigration lawyer or know a lot about immigration law, you think this actually applies to me.
Yeah.
Right. But there's this carelessness, this like, all right, we send an email, who cares? But people could have had like a literal heart attack because of it. Maybe people will self deport. Who knows? Like, people like a lot, like it's so, I think, evil and careless to do that. But that's part of what's happening. And yes, I mean,
Well, I think to put a fine point on it, it's using terror tactics. The federal government using terror tactics. Like, if the government is willing to do it to them, what other groups and what other ways are they willing to do that? Right? If they're terrorizing CBS saying we don't like your report, so I'm going to take your license, what else does that extend to? Like, it's just like, I'd ask American libertarians, like, your basic anti-Bush, anti-Obama talking points. At some point, you have to kick in. Like, I'd love information from you on them scanning people's social medias, because that to me sounds like something I would have said in 2010. Like, hey, the government is building the ability to do these sorts of things. Snowden's telling us that. When and where, why are they going to use it? Because so often, like, by the ACLU defended Nazis in Skokie, is that oftentimes there's these outs and these groups that can't fight back, and that's how the government starts to condition a public to, curtailing rights. So how are they scanning immigrants' social media? How is that working? What does that look like, if you know anything about it?
yeah. So yeah. No, I think what you said is true. There's this chilling effect, right? This making examples out of people or organizations or whatever to be like making these examples so people will think twice before doing this thing that I don't like, being the government, right?
Hence the lawyers all having to cut deals, because these are the law firms that have the resources to sue the government. So
Right.
Garcia can't hire one. So it's a chilling effect.
And then if they did this to Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student, I mean, there's like some potential criminal activity there when I'm not in, like, but he should have been charged with a crime if there was a crime. And by the way, I find his views absolutely repulsive on the Israel-Hamas conflict. I am on the side of Israel. I think Israel has a right to defend itself, but that's a different topic. But yes, there's this chilling effect of going after people for like, if you're not in line with what the government wants, then you are at risk. You are being threatened. So, look, I am not a citizen yet. I am a legal immigrant. I am working on my citizenship because I really, really want to be an American on paper as well as in spirit. But I speak about immigration issues, and I defend individual rights, and I speak against what I think is an injustice and a failure to live up to the values of the Declaration of Independence, which means that I sometimes speak against the Trump administration. That is risky. It may be risky, who knows, right? Because they're now
Do you have
targeting.
trepidation about that?
So I have been I will never stop speaking my mind and defending this incredible country against things that I think are absolutely inappropriate and against its most core and basic values. Um, I have been told maybe start writing under a pen name. Honestly, I'm not going to do that. And it's not an easy time to be an immigrant in America. Even again, I'm a legal immigrant. I followed every rule, every single. It's incredibly complicated and hard to follow every rule. I did with lawyers just to be sure that I was doing things right. I have knowledge of the immigration law and what is being asked of me as an immigrant to pay every fee, everything 100% above board. Still, could my views, put me in harm's way? Meaning, could something happen to me? Look, I don't think I fit the description of the people that are having their visas revoked or their green cards, like the Khalil case. I am not pro Hamas in the slightest. I am which is they're targeting Palestinian, pro Palestine, pro Hamas protesters. I also don't have anything ever, not abroad, not in Argentina, not here in my criminal record, so to speak, not even a speeding ticket. So technically, I should be okay. Now, is the Trump administration going to start targeting views that are other than these foreign policy issues that they're concerned about now? Honestly, I think it is a slippery slope. They start with the very unpopular views, which I think most Americans reject the views of the Hamas supporters, and I think they should. But, they always start with the unpopular targets, right? To measure, okay, if we go after the pro-Hamas people, what if we then go against the people who advocate for trans rights or whatever other, topic that the American public finds offensive or doesn't agree with? And then that can escalate really quickly. So I will always speak my mind. This is still America. I have First Amendment rights. I speak my mind. I debate. I write, and I want this country, like using Trump terms, I want this country to win because I win and everybody wins when this country is doing well. And I'm trying to make that happen. And I think immigration and respecting the rights of immigrants and basic due process rights is absolutely necessary to make that happen.
All right. Just a final word. I'd love to, I'm sure I didn't ask you something, or I'm sure you've been thinking about something that we haven't covered, but I just love to give you the last word and say whatever your piece is.
No, yeah, just, I think that I'm heartened to see that you are you put it, I think you put it earlier, that it was embarrassing to live through some of the things that are happening, like you as an American. And I think that I think many Americans feel that way. And I think that it's time to, for Americans to speak their mind peacefully within the boundaries of the law, obviously. But it's time to, write a letter to the editor, write to your congressperson, and use every freedom that, the Constitution gives Americans, including voting when the time comes, to make their voices heard. If Americans think that that a lot of what's going on is an erosion of American principles and constitutional principles, they should make it known. I think sometimes people take for granted how much speech means and how much power they can exercise through, the freedoms that America affords its residents. So I just would say, if you feel like this is an injustice, just speak your mind, make it known, And there's so many ways to do that. And for those who are especially concerned about the immigration issue, yeah, again, speak about it. And if you can support in some way, your immigrant neighbor or whatever, like it's not an easy time to be an immigrant in America. It's a little bit scary. So just make sure you if you care about that cause, to express at least your support to those individuals.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me. It is always great to talk to you. I love having conversations with you, and I hope we can touch base in a couple months and have you back, because I'm sure this is not going away, and we've got 3.5 long years left to go. And I wish you the best in your immigration proceedings. And if there's anything our audience or I can do to help you, then we are certainly game to do that. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Chris, for having me.
And thank you for listening and watching to the Chris Spangle Show. This is a great episode with a great perspective from Augustina. And I really wish you would share it with your friends. It's a great way to kind of get the message out that counters, I think, prevailing conventional wisdom. So please send it in a text to your friend. That is a great way to help get her message out and the message of freedom and liberty. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Chris Spangle Show. Well, thank you again for